Overwatch 2 Season 2 has just dropped, and the devs have already been talking about what future changes we can expect. Alec Dawson, the lead hero designer on Overwatch 2, has been replying to questions about balance and even some about specific heroes. Mr. Dawson has covered a pretty wide list of things, so we're going to cover them all in this video and talk about possibilities. Christmas time is here, and Santa has left in your stocking an easy and quick way to get to GM. There has never been a better time to get your membership to GameLeap.com. You can use code SANTA at checkout and get 50% off. Not only that, not only will you get access to everything, but 10 people will be picked for a free VOD review from our top coaches. That is an insane amount of value, so hurry up and click on the link right now and get your membership today. So for starters, it seems that they've been paying very close attention to the Sombra and Zarya changes that they made early on in Overwatch 2's timeline. Alec Dawson goes on to say, with any of our balance changes, we'll see how those heroes do afterwards. If we look at Sombra and Zarya, those were too harsh, which I think is perfectly accurate. I mean, Zarya and Sombra were both must picks at the start of Overwatch, and now they are low tier picks, it seems. I definitely think that Zarya can be another contender if we just give her some numbers changes rather than a full rework or anything crazy, but there is a part of me that is very nervous about buffing Sombra just because she is historically a very anti-fun hero to play against. But we'll come back to that in a moment. Like I said, they're also paying attention to how much the passive change, which has dropped the movement speed buff that it once had on an elimination, they're paying attention to how that deals with Genji, and they might need to tweak Genji as a result of whether or not that makes him not as strong as he used to be. A player also went on to ask, what do you guys think about the balanced state of Cassidy? Alec Dawson went on to say he's perhaps too one-note in his capabilities as they point towards similar functions. There's a lot that goes into ability reworks, but I think ultimately we want to find slightly more utility for Cassidy. This would be a massive step in the right direction for Cass. There was an image circling Twitter not too long ago that was comparing the wall of text that was Ramatra's abilities and cooldowns, and it very accurately listed Cassidy and just said gun, shoot. And when you really think about it, that is all there is to Cass at this point. I mean, he just does damage. He doesn't have any utility of any kind, really. His movement is bad. It's hardly even mentionable. His magnetic grenade is basically just a headshot. There's really no difference to it. And his high noon is just more shooting. And even worse, his high noon is bad right now. It's actually a really bad ultimate at the moment. That all being said, Cassidy is good at the shooting. He is good at what he does. So any adjustments to how much utility he has a lot of potential to make him pretty broken. We'll just have to keep a close eye on what they have planned. He also briefly touched on the idea of the dev team being open to giving Junker Queen more buffs. If you watched either of the patch day videos we put out on the release of Season 2, you would know that Junker Queen got nerfed pretty hard. And interestingly enough, I did have a lot of people pointing out why this change was actually a buff, which I actually do still disagree with. Just to quickly touch on that, the reason why people are saying it's a buff is because they didn't reduce the damage over time, so that means it technically ticks damage faster, which means a higher DPS. But that damage that she did with her ultimate was marginal compared to the anti-grenade effect. The real power from her ultimate was that people could not heal during it, and you'd be able to go all the way into a backline with the mobility, anti their backline, and be able to actually fight and get kills that way. The selling point of her ultimate was to be able to surprise engage on a moment's notice and suddenly just remove all of the heals from the enemy team, which made it difficult for them to sustain from follow-up damage, not because she was able to go in and get a ton of healing from her passive. Now with Piraco, that has changed quite a bit, and that is definitely something that has taken Junker Queen a lot of tiers down. Right now she is pretty much pointless to play. And I entirely expect, as someone who's played the game for a very long time, that this is not going to be enough of a buff to make Junker Queen relevant at all. In fact, the worst part of her changes was the hitbox change. That is a massive change to make. So yeah, it's good to hear that the devs are at least going to be paying close attention and possibly giving her more changes depending on how she plays. Alec Dawson also hinted at some very interesting HOG nerfs that could come down the pipeline. He says, we want to make sure our heroes have sharp mechanical identities, and sometimes their abilities are going to result in larger imbalance of fun than others. There's also a risk evaluation here. Sombra probably doesn't have enough of that risk with her E, which we'll come back to in a second. So we want to make sure if there are sharp things occurring, there's also an amount of risk. You can look at HOG right now and say that there's not enough risk now that we have cleanse. In the future, we may look at his kit to either inject risk or decrease decrease payoff to be closer. To me, this essentially reads as either they're going to reduce his sustain through his take a breather, or they are going to decrease the effectiveness of his hook so that he doesn't have as much, like they say, payoff. And to be clear, it's my opinion that HOG should actually have a nerf to his breather and not his hook. I think his hook, although it's unfun to play against sometimes, is an important piece of his kit. If you were to change anything about his hook, maybe the hitbox would be a good place to start, make it not as easy to land. But either way, we can definitely tell that they are paying close attention to HOG, and with how much the community is requesting changes to HOG and the fact that he's still extremely powerful and is actually pushing Ramatra down, we can expect some HOG changes in the future. Okay, so here's the big one. This is where the Sombra talk that I mentioned is. James Rays on Twitter asked, are you planning any significant changes to Sombra? As it stands now with her damage, it's less than it was during Overwatch 1, and she has an arguably worse hack. And to be clear, I totally agree with this. They go on to say, I get she was too strong with the 40% damage boost, but did she really need that plus a nerf to an already weaker hack? And Alec Dawson's response is, we want to take a more significant look at Sombra and her kit versus just number tweaking. So that may take a little time, but when we do make changes to her, we'll aim them to be larger than a balance pass. Now, on the surface, when you look at that, you might think, oh, those could just be really big number changes, right? It could just mean a long list of changes like Doomfist got this patch. But let me tell you why I think this is going to be a bigger deal than that. I think this is going to be a full-on rework based on a few things that Alec has said elsewhere. The most significant of which is, of course, right here in front of us, again, where he says a more significant look than just number tweaking. But if you look back when he was talking about risk versus reward, he also specifically mentioned Sombra as an example. And in particular, he mentioned the translocator, which was not a proper risk reward sort of ratio. The only way to interpret that is that translocator is super risk free, because it is. There is no risk to using translocator, and you get the cooldown back as soon as you teleport. And that to me reads that they are probably going to nerf it, which would mean they need to compensate with buffs elsewhere. And this is also interesting to note that right before he talked about the risk evaluation with Sombra's translocator, he mentioned some abilities having a fun imbalance over others. Now, back when everybody was calling for Sombra nerfs, this was very common rhetoric. People talking about fun imbalance, hack not being fun to play against, and people talking about her translocator having no risk and her permanent invisibility having no risk. So while on the surface, Alec was just talking about HOG and some of the things people have been saying about him, I also think that there is a reason why the connection was made with Sombra. And we know that the dev team have been paying close attention to Sombra based off of earlier when they said the changes to Zarya and Sombra were possibly too harsh. So my guess is that they have had some workshopping talks going on where they've discussed, okay, if we buff Sombra, we're going to have these same problems that the community was facing, where she's not fun to play against and she's low risk. And so they likely have just settled on figuring out, how do we rework her to make her more fun? How do we make her abilities more risk reward? How do we do X and Y, you know? And it's entirely possible that I'm reading into it too much and that I'm just completely off the mark here, but I really think that we are going to have a Sombra rework coming very soon. Moving on, there was also a question asking, will we be seeing any changes to Ball or Brigitte? These two characters have been on the edge of probably the worst in their roles to easily the worst in their roles without question. It feels both of these characters are overlooked, and maybe you can expound on that. Also, as a side note, I've never heard the word expound before, so thank you, Father Price, for the new vocab. But anyway, Alec responded, mentioned this in another place, but yeah, we have something we like for Brig, but need to find timing. There are some dependencies here on other groups. Ball is at the top of our list still. We will be trying some iterations on his changes soon. The wording in this is interesting. I read it as there are some other changes that need to come out before the Brig changes do in order to not disrupt balance, whereas the Ball changes are much more straightforward, so hopefully we'll see those coming out very soon, especially the Brig one. Brig has been bad for most of Overwatch 2. I know a lot of you disagree with me on that, but it's just a simple fact. There is never going to be a hero that is impossible to win with, especially if you're playing below your rank. You're going to have a higher win rate as you start to climb and get more settled at where you deserve to be. But just by raw numbers and execution, there is just no character that Brig is better than in the support line. All of them have more utility or more healing or more consistency or more movement. Like, she just is not great right now. That being said, I do hope they make some changes to her, and let's keep it going. I'm actually going to double back a little bit because I missed one of the things he said later on about Brig, where he said, we have something we like design-wise for Brig's ult, but it does require additional resources. So stuff like art and visual effects and just general assets on the back end. So it's nothing to do with balance, but I guess hopefully we see that come soon. But anyway, the last two things that they mention are something involving supports, because obviously supports are feeling really bad right now. He says there are a number of things we are still looking at to help support feel better in the short to medium term, such as balance in certain systems. Pretty vague, but that's what he said. Long term though, we will be making additional support heroes. For some time, every 4 heroes you'll see will be 1 tank, 1 DPS, and 2 supports. That's not exactly new information, but it's definitely worth mentioning anyway that they're doubling down on that. The last thing that Alec went on to say is that he sees lots of value in getting the experimental changes back in. If you remember, back in Overwatch 1, there was an experimental patch where people could go and play and give feedback, and the devs would be able to try crazy stuff out. He says our team also loved collaborating with the community on some of the wacky changes and hope to make that happen in the future again, which is exactly what happened. A lot of the content creators that are on YouTube actually got multiple weeks in advance to sort of try the patch and see how things are and get access to what changes were to come. So I guess more of that is coming down the pipeline. In any case, that's going to cover all of our good news for today, so be sure to like and subscribe for more educational guides and news content, and I would love to see you guys again soon. Please take care and peace. Christmas time is here, and Santa has left in your stocking an easy and quick way to get to GM. There has never been a better time to get your membership to GameLeap.com. You can use code SANTA at checkout and get 50% off. Not only that, not only will you get access to everything, but 10 people will be picked for a free VOD review from our top coaches. That is an insane amount of value, so hurry up and click on the link right now and get your membership today.